All right, so we have the same drum set that we just used in the velocity drum video. Now we are going to get these hi-hats to be a little more expressive using expression control. This is a new thing in Ableton 11 that blew my mind. When they first showed me it, I was excited by expression control, but I haven't used it until very recently, and I'm kicking myself now for not learning this because it's just such like the brink of what sound design is becoming and how to make like a robotic sounding drum set sound so real you can't distinguish it from a real one. This is where it's at. This is the future. So what we're gonna do is you're going to find the hi-hat, and this is what we have. Hi-hat closed. We have a very basic hi-hat sound, still very clean, very good, a little bit of reverb getting to our bus track, and we are going to drag this expression control before, not before the actual kit itself, but before the hi-hat, so it's just on this hi-hat. And this is going to be the expression control layout. What is this? It's kind of hard to explain at first. There's a lot of things you can do here, but all we're going to worry about is velocity. So we're going to have a velocity one right here. It should already be velocity when you first drag it on. We're going to make this one velocity, and this one velocity. I don't think we're going to do more than 4 little parameters here. And basically what they're going to do is we're going to map these velocities, or whatever the velocity of our drum hi-hat sound per se, to different knobs on the sample itself. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me show you. So let's grab this detune right here. So this detune, we want it to change depending on how hard you're hitting the hi-hat. Because if you were actually hitting a hi-hat, the harder you hit it, the higher the pitch is gonna go. Even if it's just a couple slight pitches higher, slight pitches lower, little semitones, whatever it would be, that still is processed unconsciously by the human ear, even if we don't notice it. And so when those aren't there, you're noticing how robotic it sounds, even if you can't really notice it. You're unconsciously noticing it. So we need to create these variations ourselves. So we're going to map this velocity to detune. Now you have these min and max buttons. And when it's at min, that means when you're hitting at 0% velocity, it's going to be at negative, as you can see, negative CT. If you had 100% velocity, the harder you hit, it's going to get up to positive CT. Now, because we aren't using 100%, we are using our velocity around the 80s or the 70s. We're going to want to mess with this until we kind of get where the harder hits are really being affected. Now, to even make that a little more noticeable, if you hit this little swivel S button right here, you're going to see the curve itself. Now, this curve is determined on the velocity that's coming through on the hi-hat. So if we watch when these hi-hats hit, if you watch the detune button, you'll notice it changes every single time a hi-hat hits. See how it's changing very lightly, just from 33, 34, 33. We want definite stronger hits or definite stronger changes. And so to do that, I'm going to solo this hi-hat so we can definitely just hear that. Solo the drums, so we just listen to the drums. Not getting much change. If I would change this all the way down, same thing. It's just changing the actual range. We need to actually make it so that it's a little more steep of a change where the velocity is itself. So I'm going to turn this into an S curve by hitting this different button here. Now, this knob right here can kind of make this a stronger or not stronger curve. And if you notice, we can also drag where we want it. And so our velocities, when I get close to where our hi-hat velocities are resting around, or the average is, you'll notice the detune's a little more sharper for every single hit. So let's see. Let's see if we can find that. I think it was higher. Oh. We had a sharp hit there. Oh, there we go. Where was that? A little more? No. Okay, so I'm guessing it's somewhere around there. Now let's smooth out this curve. Now we're getting some change. There we go. So every time it's going to hit harder, we're going to get a slightly higher pitch. Very slight. You're not even noticing it probably. Don't matter. I'm telling you, it's there. So now we're getting a little bit of pitch difference. What else can we do? Let's see. So because we are using our velocity drums, I normally would also have this parameter to velocity so that each hit is a little more affected, but we're not going to be doing that because we're already doing that with our velocity. We already mixed that in. But what's another thing we can do is when you hit a hi-hat, when you hit a snare, when you hit it really hard, it's going to be, the attack's going to be harder. When you hit it really soft, the attack's going to be slightly lighter. Now, the human ear, like I said, is unconsciously going to notice that. That's not something we normally normally think about when you're trying to make a real sound, but we have to think about it. So let's see. Now, the way to do that would be to either change this to a classic sample and use the attack, or the one shot, use the fade in. We could also go to classic and use the start of the loop, which is the way we're going to do it. So let's do that. I'm going to map this velocity button now to start. Now, the insane thing is it's going to be pretty crazy at first. Watch. No sound. We're not getting anything because we need the most minute changes. So I'm going to bring this max all the way down to 0, and I'm going to crank it up 1%. We are getting some changes. So basically, we're going to be resting around the max because our velocity is much higher than where it's at. So once again, I'm trying to find that velocity average so that the hard hits are actually peaking this parameter. Which it's definitely starting to look like it. But we also want those low hits to do something. Right there, seems good. Okay. So if that's confusing, all I'm really doing when I'm moving this knob is if we go to our velocities here, and we have these hi-hat velocities. So we're looking at these. You see how they're resting around the 80 to the 88? That's where like most of the hits are. That's what I'm trying to find. When I'm bringing that little circle knob up, I'm telling it that this straight line, this is the velocity curve that this expression is going to be resting at. And if we had it at normal, like a straight line like this, it's basically using a linear velocity curve. So that as you have the velocity go harder, it's just going to go up this straight line. But that only works if you really want a very straight line like that. But our velocities are resting around the 80s right here. I know we don't have numbers, so we can't really see that 80 is right here, but you have to think of it as going from 1 to 127 left to right. So if 127 is over here, value-wise on this little chart, then 1's going to be down here. So 1 to 127. And so when we have it like this on the S curve, super steep, we're trying to get the most extreme velocity variations in this expression right around where the average is of this hi-hat velocities, which is going to be around the 80s. So technically, that's kind of where that is, around the 80s and the 90s. This S curve is going to be kind of extreme. And so basically what we're looking at is now our start of the sample is being affected extremely right at these velocities. So if I were to raise the min up, it's going to raise the start up as well of the sample because I'm raising the base velocity of the expression, the lowest velocity to the highest. So I wonder if linear might be the way we want to go with this guy. If we can. Yeah, we might want to go linear. Let's see. So I'm going to bring it all the way so it's the most extreme linearly, which is 1. I'm going to start bringing it down until that starts to actually affect the lower velocities of the hi-hat. I'm going to go to the extreme. So now we can barely hear the hi-hats. All the hi-hats are being affected, even the harder hits. And now I'm going to raise it up until those harder hits are exactly the way we want them. And what that's meaning is the attack's being slightly affected. Nothing crazy, just very minimal. So it's doing what I want, but it's not doing it extreme enough. So we're going to, instead of doing it on start, we're going to actually, because there's always a different way of doing everything. If you're not getting the effect you want, you can always try a different way. We are going to map this to now attack, this knob down here. Now let's listen to what that sounds like. We're going to go back to the S curve now. See if we can get this to hopefully be the way we want. Smooth this curve out a tiny bit. And the whole time I'm changing these parameters, I'm only looking at how this attack is moving. I want it to be smoother. I don't want it to be as extreme, but I still want there to be variations. Whereas the harder hits need to come through perfectly, and the softer hits need to be a little more mellow on that attack. Now, one last thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to pan this hi-hat, but I'm going to do it with velocity, which is going to be cool. So we want the hi-hats on the right. This is the way I like to mix. I like to visualize the drum set in front of me. Hi-hat's going to be slightly on the righter side of the drums if I'm watching the drums being played. So therefore, my ears naturally would want to hear it right about here. So the right to left ratio of mixing, you would never want to hear it right in the center, right here of the mix. You want the hi-hats to be a little here. That's where you're going to be seeing them. You'll be kind of hearing them. And in a real situation, I don't think you'll notice that the hi-hat's a little more in the rear ear or in the right ear. But it is. That's the way I like to think about it. So now how are we going to do that with velocity? Now, if we watch, I just mapped the velocity to the pan right there, and it's going to put it 15 right. Now, if I were to bring this max knob all the way down, it's going to go left, all the way up, it's going to go right with the min. So now I'm going to bring the min down until we get the right pan to be resting around 10, just lightly in the right ear. So now we got to bring the max down a little bit. Tiny bit more. Maybe we want to do 15. I'm going to do that. I saw a 17 right hit. It's resting around 12, 15, 17. There's just a 9. But all that's doing is just putting it a little in the right ear, and every hard hit, you're going to get a little more in the left ear, which is naturally how the hi-hat or any snare or any sound is actually going to be heard in real life. If you were to yell at me on maybe like the right corner of a room, but you yelled at a volume where the majority of the volume is in the left ear. If you yelled incredibly loud, the reverberations off the left side of the wall are going to make it louder in the left ear, meaning that if you had a hi-hat in the right side of the room and you hit it as hard as you could, it's going to sound louder in the left ear. But if you hit it really quiet, it's going to sound a lot quieter in the left ear and a lot louder in the right ear. That's just natural vibrations of sound and how it's going to affect the room. We're trying to mimic that. And so it's these small, tiny variations that if you make, I know it's like, oh, well, no one's going to notice that. They won't notice it, but they'll unconsciously notice it. And for some reason, your drums, everyone's going to be like, geez, man, the way you mix your drums just sounds so real, so good, so natural. And you know what you're going to say? Oh, I learned expression control from SYNZ in the Mix on YouTube. Yup. All right. Well, that's pretty much it. That's kind of all we're going to get into right now. But that's expressive control. And as you can see, you can even do so much more. You can do so much more than just velocity. All I've gotten into as a sound engineer, I know it sounds crazy to say, I've only messed around with velocity. There's so much more you can actually do it. But this is how you make kind of a more expressive hi-hat. Now, in the next video, we're going to do it on the snare. Very similar, same parameters, same thing, but you just affect snares differently because snares are different than hi-hats. But that's what we're going to be getting into. Thanks for watching.